He's the star of stage and screen. And he is the professor who discovered the real Count Dracula and his castle.
It's not something you think you see out there in the darkness. It's a walking corpse.
Buried for centuries, the facts beneath the fiction. The real Count Dracula, one of the cruelest men in history.
In 1958, I was watching The Late Late Show with Bela Lugosi as Dracula. And I noticed first that it was set in Transylvania. And so I knew that was a real place. And then I noticed in the movie the mention of Bistrica, the town of Bistrica, where the character Jonathan Harker stops over. And then he goes on to the Borgo Pass, where Count Dracula is going to pick him up there. So I went to a map, and I looked beyond Bistrica on this map, and there was the Borgo Pass. I said, oh, there must be something to this story, more than... It just couldn't have been made up. All the places are impeccably correct.
Dr. McNally was determined to probe the mystery. Was Dracula more than a fictional character? Was he real? His quest moved from the Late Show to research libraries to several dead ends.
Finally, I came across a journal with an obscure little footnote in it saying, yes, indeed, there had been someone named Dracula, and he was a Romanian ruler, and that he had lived in the 15th century.
Beginning with this arcane reference, Professor McNally pieced together the shocking story of one of the cruelest men in history. Sworn to the Order of the Dragon, or Dracul in Romanian, this 15th century prince, known to his subjects as Dracula, defended his region of Wallachia through the sadistic execution of his enemies, the Turks.
The name given him by the Turks was Casiklu Voivoda, the Impaling Prince. The Impaling Prince. And in Romanian, the name is Țepeș. Țepeș in Romanian means the Impaler. That's real terror, and that's what he did.
This gruesome form of slow death terrified his enemies and satisfied Vlad's insatiable appetite for blood. Although feared by his own countrymen, he was also revered as a hero for taking the drastic measures needed to keep out the forces of Dracula's enemy, the Sultan of Turkey.
At one point, he created a forest of the impaled, some 23,000. Including Turks, Bulgarians, and a lot of other various people, to greet the Sultan, Mehmed II, Muhammad II, the great conqueror. When he came to Dracula country, he was greeted outside the capital city by a forest of impaled. The Sultan is supposed to have said, according to one of his own chroniclers, what can one do against a man who does such things? He's talking about Dracula. And he turned his forces around and went back home. It wasn't worth it.
But Vlad didn't stop there. Dracula ruled by fear, and his cruelty was often directed at his own countrymen.
He invited the poor and the sick to a great banquet, gave them plenty to eat, and after they had eaten and drunk plenty, he said, is there anything more I can do for you? And they said, Lord, if we could be just relieved of our daily cares. So he said, fine. So he had the doors bolted down and the windows, and he had the whole place set on fire. They all died. Then he said, well, look, I did what they wanted. Now they've all gone to heaven. They have no more daily cares.
In his twisted way, Prince Vlad had a strong sense of morality. He was, it might be said, a law and order man. Law was determined by whatever offended him, and order was maintained with total ruthlessness.
Impaled generally for little offenses as well as for what you and I would call major ones. And that's the essence of terror, you see. Real terror is the systematic use of indiscriminate violence, which is kind of paradoxical. Guilt or innocence is irrelevant, as in the Nazi period. That's real terror, and that's what he did.
Once, when traveling monks visited Vlad's castle, the prince was offended that they didn't remove their caps. So he had them nailed to their heads. His deeds were so evil that, with time, Romanian villagers began to associate him with a second meaning for the word Dracul, devil. Later in life, Prince Vlad died in ambush at the hands of the Turks. His head was sent to the Sultan as a trophy. Monks at a monastery in the marshes near Bucharest retrieved his body, laying the evil prince in a crypt near the chapel altar. But Vlad would not accept this holy site as his final resting place. In 1931, archaeologists opened the tomb. To their horror, the casket and the body were missing. Did Vlad indeed sign a pact with the devil? Professor McNally, determined to reveal the true story of Dracula, went to Romania on a Fulbright fellowship in 1969. Tracing local records, he discovered the ruins of the dread Castle Dracula.
Perched 1,000 feet high on top of a huge rock, or like mountain rock. Nothing else there, sheer drop on all sides, and it has that ominous feeling about it.
Construction of the castle was a superhuman feat. To get slave labor, Vlad attacked the boyars, a group of wealthy landowners who he believed had killed his brother. Taken from their Easter celebrations, he had the elderly impaled, then pressed into slavery every man, woman, and child. They labored for months until their fine clothes turned to rags and fell from their bodies. Many also plunged to their deaths while moving heavy stones on the side of the steep precipice.
So it was with great apprehension that I went there. And when I got to the top, it all rushed in on me, the whole experience. Sort of like opening the tomb of Tutankhamun or something like that in 1923, a big moment in your life. So I just couldn't go in. But then one of the people in our group came and literally held my hand. And really, as long as I felt a human touch, I was okay, and I went in.
Irish author Bram Stoker, in 1897, in his novel Dracula, wrote mysterious passages about Transylvania, the land beyond the forest. Stoker based his writing on unsolved cases of the undead in these Carpathian mountains, cloaked in mist.
This woman, a travel writer, wrote this book, The Land Beyond the Forest. And if you read the book and you read Stoker's book, you see he owed so much to her. You know, we love to see the lonely, frightening castle on the hill, or the dark roads at night with howling wolves and flying bats. This all comes from a travel book, The Land Beyond the Forest.
It is here in Transylvania where the vampire bat has its origin. Walking on two legs, spreading webbed appendages resembling a cape, exposing terrible fangs that first numb and then suck the blood from rodents and other victims who seem unable to repel their attacker. A predatory creature so odd it would seem to have no equal, until one has the disquieting realization that the vampire bat was named for the vampire, not the other way around. These inexplicable mysteries found their place in Stoker's Dracula.
Nothing strange or bizarre or inexplicable happens for the first 40 pages of the novel. Everything is absolutely realistic. The geography is correct. Train schedules are proper, down to the minute. Everything is exact. So the atmosphere is built up in you as you read it. And then you ease in the unreality very, very carefully. And at that point, the reader has literally been sucked into the story already.
Dr. Reed has discovered that, at times, the lines between fiction and fact are blurred.
The historical Dracula owes so much to the Vlad the Impaler because he existed as an evil prince and ruler. So when Stoker was writing the book, He went to historical sources, and he blended the vampire myth with this figure of Dracula. We wouldn't think of Dracula as a vampire today had not Bram Stoker created his novel.
And the idea behind it was a very clever one. Here was this person who was so resolute, so steadfast, so powerful in his own life. How much more powerful will he be then resurrected as an undead? Because he'll carry all that experience with him from the past.
But the walking corpses who rose out of Transylvania were not content to stay there. New York vampirologist Gene Youngston investigates cases of vampirism in the United States.
I've interviewed almost 50 people who claim to be vampires or who are vampire-like.
Her stories include cases of both men and women who must feed their desire for blood.
I heard from a middle-aged woman who told me that she had grown up one of 8 children, and her parents hadn't paid too much attention to her. Her mother was a potter, and she remembered her mother always being out in the back room making pots and throwing them into the kiln. And finally she had an opportunity to go and live with an aunt who lived in East Orange, New Jersey. Next door to her aunt, there lived a butcher and his wife, and she spent a lot of time with these people. They were very warm. They were very warm to her, and it was one of the first times she had ever received that kind of affection. Butcher would bring home raw meat at night, and she would very often be over there for dinner, and she would see him pouring the blood off the meat and into a cup, and he would drink it down. Eventually, his wife died, and she hoped that he would marry her, but he didn't.
The facts of her young life hazy in her mind, the woman felt compelled to fulfill strange urges.
She found herself wanting blood, so these days she goes into supermarkets and walks up and down the meat aisles and chooses the packages that have loose blood and takes them home and drinks it. She has recurring dreams about marrying this fellow, and in her dreams they are lying next to each other and they exchange blood through their mouths.
Female vampires can claim as their predecessor the notorious Countess Erzsébet Bathory of Hungary. She is believed to have killed more than 650 virgins, using their blood as a rejuvenating nectar.
There have been several novels and films about a female vampire based on a historical countess, a blood countess whose big thing wasn't vampires, but her big thing was taking the blood of young women and bathing in the blood to stay young.
One lady from New Jersey grew up feeling unloved and unwanted. She went to a parochial school, and the nuns told her that Jesus loved her. All around the walls there were paintings of Jesus with the crown of thorns, the blood running down his face, and she began to equate love with blood. And as she grew older, she was a teacher. She became a teacher, and when the kids would fall down, she would sop up their blood with a hanky and then take the handkerchief home and suck the blood out of that.
The vampire both destroys and creates life at the same time, drawing his sustenance from the victim. If he fails to kill and instead mixes his blood with the living, then that person will in turn become an undead. As in history, today's vampires must search for fresh blood.
There are people walking the streets of Los Angeles at midnight who believe they are vampires.
The new blood revitalizes the corpse, turning the complexion from a pasty white pallor to appearing flushed and full. The victim generally is doomed to rise again and live the curse of the undead, while the memory of the attack is hazy and unclear, like a dream. In this way, the identity of the vampire is kept secret.
There's no way to know who is a vampire. They're pretty low-key. unless they really want publicity, they just do their own thing behind locked doors.
But how do we identify the vampires in our midst? The characteristics are similar to death. The nails may grow long and curved, or in latter stages may fall off entirely. The eyes appear discolored and watery. The hair is thinning. The skin may be white or greenish in hue. In short, vampires are frightening, as in the 1922 silent film Nosferatu.
The vampire looks the way a vampire should look, unlike the way Lugosi portrayal or Lee portrayal or Langella portrayal, which is the suave continental type with the tuxedo and the cape and all that. In Nosferatu, the vampire is ugly. It's a walking corpse after all. It's gaunt, has these bulging eyes, and it is, in the real sense, horrible, in the original horrible sense of disgusting.
Another method of detecting vampires has been popularized in the movies.
The vampire cannot cast a reflection in a mirror. This is traditional. This is accepted by everyone. If you see someone standing next to you in front of a mirror and there's no reflection, please look out. Be very careful.
Those who can see the true nature of vampires are best able to avoid becoming their victims. Vampires once needed a castle or other remote location for their coffin, but today's vampires can make do in a dark corner of a modern city. Because the vampire acts in concert with the devil, the Christian symbols of holy water and crosses are widely recognized deterrents.
How did Dracula become a vampire? Well, he sold his soul to the devil. He became an evil prince. He was in league with Satan. Traditionally, the vampire is afraid of the Christian symbol. And in many of the films and books, the cross on which Christ was crucified, is used to fight off the vampire. He will cringe away from the symbol of Jesus Christ.
One of the things most feared by vampires is garlic. Romanian villagers often hung strings of cloves outside their windows to keep vampires from entering.
You could bury someone with a lot of garlic around their neck. You could bury someone with 2 crosses around their neck. You could do several of these things. But the vampire cannot enter where he is not welcomed. And he particularly cannot enter in holy ground where the body and blood of Christ is. So, for instance, if you put a wafer, holy wafer, which was turned into the body and blood of Christ at Mass, that would be great protection.
In Romania, graves suspected of holding vampires would be dug up, where it was often discovered that the flesh had not decomposed. A stake would be driven through the vampire's soul and into the heart. Fresh blood would flow, followed by a scream, and then peace.
It's just as strong as the stake. From the Max Schreck film to the Klaus Kinski film is the power of light, which is the symbol of purity, of goodness, of God.
Various methods of repelling vampires have been woven into the oral tradition of many countries.
The last time I was in Greece, a friend who knew I was interested in vampires took me to Santorini, and somewhere he managed to get these 5 anti-vampire pebbles. The way it works is you hold them out toward a suspected vampire and they will run screaming in the opposite direction.
The practice of placing headstones on graves was to prevent the dead from sitting up and walking again as vampires.
In Romania recently, they actually buried a corpse at a crossroad because when it reanimated, it wouldn't know which way to go.
But despite these precautions, extreme methods were often necessary to stop a plague of attacks.
Drive a nail through its forehead, cut out its heart, and slice it in twain. Smear it with the fat of a pig killed on St. Ignatius Day, February 1st, October 17th, December 17th or December 20th. Put a clove of garlic or a stone or a lemon in its mouth. Sprinkle its body with holy water. Drive a stake through its heart. Give it a knitted sock to unravel. Bury it face downward. Take away its shroud. Blow up its tomb.
Our perceptions of vampires are mostly shaped by what we've seen in the movies. Bela Lugosi immortalized the vampire as a suave, romantic figure with an authentic Hungarian accent that became his trademark.
He learned many of his lines phonetically, and that, strangely enough, helped his delivery. It's very weird. I mean, when he says good night to Renfield, the agent who's come to sell him the property, he says, "Good night, Mr. Renfield." And you and I would say, "Good night, Mr. Renfield." I mean, it's a throwaway line, but to him, see, he's laboring it. That gives it its peculiar charm, and then that's the reason why schoolboys and schoolgirls the world over, and practically everyone, can do an imitation of Bela Lugosi.
In Lugosi's Dracula, released in 1931, the vampire must return to his coffin at night or risk being killed by the light of day. Scholars say this simply is not true.
The fact that Dracula and a vampire can really exist during the day but has no power, his powers are not there, that isn't realized today because as kids we grew up seeing in the theaters, on television, the movies where sunlight destroys the vampire. And it doesn't really, if you believe in the reality of the vampire, or you go to Stoker's 1897 novel.
After 500 years, Dracula lives. After seeing the gruesome facts of Dracula's life and curse from beyond the grave, is our fascination one of fear, one of pleasure, or one of seduction?
We're fascinated by Dracula for several reasons. Manliness, immortality, romance, eroticism, and entertainment. And the Count seduces women. He has a great conquest of women. Women feel an ecstasy in surrendering to his sexual powers. There's no question about that. Count, who's lived for 500 years, has suffered immortality as a curse, not as a benefit. To me, it seems a great benefit. But to the Dracula figure, the reality of life is burdensome. To be dead, to be really dead, that must be glorious.
As we approach the 21st century, there has been a renewed interest in vampires and all that these dark figures represent. Images of fear, immortality, and seduction.
I see the Dracula Renaissance as a quest for the numinous. That is otherworldly experiences. The occult has never been stronger as it is today.
Well, that wide-range current appeal of Dracula really, I think, goes back to his being a human. He's not an apparition. He's not a ghost. It's not something you think you see out there in the darkness. It's a walking corpse. It's palpable. And in that sense, it's like, human reality.
Dracula image has become commonplace, even trivialized. Dracula is portrayed in comic books, record albums, figurines, grocery items, and even children's toys. But beware, vampires are among us. One thing is for sure, fears of vampires do not arise only from fantasy. We leave you with a warning.
Just a word or two, ladies and gentlemen. A word before you go. When you go to bed tonight, and the lights have all been turned out, and you think you seem to see a figure appearing at the window, just remember, there are such things.